Hello, welcome to another edition of Jet Setting. Ted Wyman here with Scott Billeck, both with the Winnipeg Sun. Ted, I don't even know what day this, day 8, I guess, of training camp or something like that. There's only about 3 more sleeps until the Jets actually hit the ice for the regular season. A lot coming together. Jets held, I guess, the closest thing that'll happen, closest thing that they'll get to a preseason game with their own little scrimmage today. I believe it was 3 periods. I believe it ended in tie and regulation, and that was it. They had a little impromptu shootout after. But I guess, what did you take from that? I mean, I saw Trevor Lewis was on the third line with Andrew Kopp and Adam Lowry. You saw, defensive pairings on both sides that would kind of, some of them would mirror what you might see in the regular season, some may not. What did you see? What did you take out of today's scrimmage?
Well, I mean, the thing that strikes me the most about it is that this is really their only chance to kind of skate in a game simulated situation before the regular season starts on Thursday night when the Calgary Flames come to town. There's no preseason games. There's no real way for this team to be battle ready. So they had to do their absolute best today to simulate that. And I thought it was interesting. There was a couple of hits in that game. Adam Lowry blasted Christian Vesalainen along the boards. It was a big hit. There was a few other, hits. There was some physical play, some intensity to it for sure, because they're trying to get to that level. As for the lines and whatnot that we saw out there, you can't read too much into that because some players weren't there, some weren't available, and they moved some people around who hadn't been together in practice in previous days during training camps. So I can't say too much on that front, but I think you can safely say that the top 6 are going to be what they have been all of camp, which is going to be Mark Scheifele with Blake Wheeler and Nikolai Ehlers, Paul Stastny with Kyle Connor and Patrick Laine, and a pretty high-scoring second line. Your third line's Adam Lowry and Andrew Kopp, and then insert player here on the right wing there. It would have been Jack Roslovic if he was still in town, but he's not. He doesn't have a contract. Mason Appleton's been there. Mathieu Perreault's been there. And Trevor Lewis was there today, although he still hasn't even signed a contract. That should come Tuesday if he's going to be around with this team on that third line. And then the fourth line, there's still quite a few players in the mix there. I think Nate Thompson will be the center. And then Jansen Harkins, if he comes off of the injury that he's been battling, and possibly Appleton or Lewis there as well, and Perreault obviously in the mix too. So that's going to be an interesting look at those forwards, and the defense isn't quite set yet, although I think it's what we've been seeing in camp all along, which is big player, small player on those defense pairings. And I'm thinking that, they're pretty much ready to go here. The question is just who's going to be on this roster, who's going to be on the taxi squad. We'll find all that out on Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, I guess big news of the day here. Big news in terms that that Mathieu Perreault was put on waivers, which might be a shock to some fans. I mean, here's a guy who's getting paid 4.12 million in his final year of a contract. Usually a dependable. I mean, he's been injury prone at times, but a dependable guy that can play up and down your lineup, and here he is on waivers. It's obviously not just, we're trying to shed this contract, because they would have done that earlier. There's obviously some cap compliance implications when it comes to this. But, what did you hear about the Perreault, and what did you kind of take from him being put on waivers today?
Well, I think some people were shocked by it, Scott, but when you look at the other players who were placed on waivers today, and there was 89 of them, they included Tyler Johnson in Tampa Bay, Corey Perry in Montreal, Louis Eriksson in Vancouver. These are all veteran players. Some of Perry doesn't have a big contract, but the other guys do. They have big contracts, and it is about cap compliance. When Paul Maurice said that when he was asked about it, he said it doesn't mean anything as to whether Mathieu Perreault will be on the opening day roster for the Winnipeg Jets, unless he does happen to get taken on waivers. I'm finding that pretty unlikely when he has that big contract that you talked about, but also when there's all these other players available right now. I don't think this is about trying to shed a salary. I don't think it's about trying to get rid of Mathieu Perreault. I think it's just a procedural move that they needed to do. And, they did the same thing. Lucas Spies has been put on there as well. One thing that it does allow them with both those players is now they could be placed on the taxi squad, because you do have to go through waivers before you can go on the taxi squad. Conceivably, they could play with the Manitoba Moose, but I don't see that there's any thinking like that here. but it does give them some flexibility roster wise as well.
Well, and that's part of, yeah, and that's an interesting thing because, let's say Mathieu Perreault could conceivably be, that third line right winger. He also could play on that fourth line. But the emergence of Trevor Lewis, and obviously he got a late start due to being in quarantine. But he's, from what I've seen and what I've read, mostly, he's made a bit of an impact here. A veteran player, solid, as a, kind of a bottom line guy. Played with Adam Lowry and Andrew Kopp today during the scrimmage. It's almost like, he's come in and, like you said, he doesn't have a contract yet, and that'll be squared away by tomorrow. I assume, if the Jets are going to keep him, and it looks at this way that they are. What, it seems like there's no room maybe for Perreault, given that it's likely that Nate Thompson will be that fourth line center, and assuming Jansen Harkins and Mason Appleton are healthy, those two guys are also going to play. So it leaves Perreault in a weird spot. But what have you seen from Lewis that's kind of maybe given him that upper hand?
Well, he's a veteran guy, and he's a pro's pro, Scott. I mean, he played 12 seasons with Los Angeles Kings. He was their fourth line center for most of those years. He knows so much about that role, and he's played it at a high level, and he's played it in the playoffs. And, I think the Jets like that. They like that kind of experience. And I think fitting him in with Nate Thompson, who's another guy with a lot of experience. They did have Perreault on the line with those two guys as well this week, which Kelly Moore of CGOB dubbed the Dirty 30s line, and that got a laugh out of Nate Thompson. And I think, it would be an interesting thing to see, because that kind of experience, it may not be a great offensive line, but boy, you sure would trust that line out on the ice in key situations when they're for a fourth line.
Yeah.
I think more so than in other years, there's some real experience there, but that's kind of the truth about the Jets as a whole. There's a lot more experience with this lineup than there has been in recent years. And even the young players, the guys that were prospects only a couple of years ago, are now veterans themselves. This is not a young team. It's definitely a more veteran team than it has been. And I think that that's something that's going to, make life a little easier for the coaching staff. But it also means that the coaching staff is going to have to perform. Because if you've got a veteran team here, or at least close to a veteran team, and it's got a lot of talent, the next question is, can it perform? And if it doesn't, you got to point fingers somewhere.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see. I was reading one tweet from a writer saying, coaches almost have a bit of immunity this year, given that, teams are already losing enough money as it is. And, having two coaches on payroll, usually when you fire a coach, he still has some contract left. Then you have to pay another one. So that's an interesting thing. But, you touched on the veteran stuff. And we obviously, on defense, they brought in Derek Forbert for a little bit of that as well. Based on what I've seen, Dylan Sandberg's had a pretty good camp and maybe even pro ready. But based on the pairings that we've seen, it doesn't look like there's a spot for him at the moment, just given how it's shaken out. I assume they'll want him to play in the AHL if that gets up and running eventually next month. But it's almost like he's right on that bubble, like one injury and Dylan Sandberg could play. What's your take on Sandberg and how his camp has gone?
Well, I didn't see every minute of his camp because he was in the early morning group, and I need beauty sleep. But he clearly did make an impression on the coaches. He was good enough to earn an invitation to come up and play with the main group on Sunday, and I thought he looked quite good in the game, in the scrimmage on Monday afternoon at Bell MTS Place. So I think he is a player that they obviously like. They'd like to actually work him into the lineup at some point here, but it's difficult because they haven't ever seen him in an NHL game. The best he's come is this scrimmage, and one scrimmage last week as well. And then you've got Billy Heinola, who's just coming off the World Junior. But Paul Maurice said today he is going to be on the taxi squad. They need to have him around to give him a look. So that they've sort of set their top 8 defensemen, and their familiar faces from last year mostly, except with Derek Forbert thrown in there. And then, you're going to have Sami Niku on there, because Sami Niku, I don't think they want to put on waivers. They want to keep him around as one of their top 8 guys. Spiza, now they have flexibility with him. and then who the other guy, maybe you're going to have a Sandberg or a Hanel in there and try to get them into the lineup a little more, but at least have them practicing with the team all the time until the AHL does start up. And then maybe you've got an option to let those guys play down there just to keep them going. But, it's very interesting to see what will happen with both those guys, because I think they are close to NHL ready, if not NHL ready.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting this year, just given that this team actually has some depth, and fans will remember how bleak it was last year when without Trouba, without Ben Sherratt, without Dustin Byfuglien as a late camp, or an early preseason just not even showing up type thing. So yeah, it's interesting to see the kind of depth they have and who would be coming up first. Would it be a Nick who does at least have some NHL experience, or even a Ville Heinola who also does too, or do they go with the big guy in Sandberg? So definitely a lot of storylines to go here as we inch closer. And I wouldn't say inch. I mean, we're getting pretty close. 3 more sleeps until the first game. So lots to watch. And I guess tomorrow is kind of the unofficial start to the regular season based on what Maurice has said. So we'll have a lot more coming here from the Winnipeg Sun. For Ted Wyman, Scott Billeck, thanks for watching.